Zhang Eiling's Little Reunion Text Chapter 4. Chude found a job at a German radio station as a Mandarin news reporter. She held a small oil lamp and walked to work on the darkened streets every night. The rose-red lampshade is covered with particles to prevent the glass from slipping and being easily broken. However, after the occupation, the roads were in disrepair and there were many potholes and pools. Sometimes I would kick in the lampshade in the dark and the lamp would still be smashed. I would come back in the dark and shake it. She shook her head and just said drink. The Cheongsam was covered with a large navy serge cotton robe instead of a coat. It was her night clothes and self-defense clothing. She learned to ride a bicycle, but she failed to learn how to ride a bicycle even after falling below her knees many times. When she learned to drive before, she was not very good at driving. The Polish driver would always sit next to her, waiting to change seats with her. I'm useless. My second aunt has her feet bound and can ski, so I'm afraid of breaking my legs. Chang Gaiwan, a literary man who became popular in the 20s, came out to start a magazine again, and Julie went to submit articles. Chude smiled quietly and said, the second aunt wanted to escape from the marriage at that time, and wrote a letter to Chang Gaiwan. What happened next? Julie couldn't help but ask. Have we met? We didn't meet. I don't know if there was a reply. I don't remember. He added, Chang Gaiwan is very handsome. I have seen photos. Later he got married and his wife was also highly praised. His poems we all laughed to death when they said, we'll always end up together except when we leave home. At that time, people often submitted articles under the pseudonym Ms. So-and-so. Julie guessed that when Chang Gaiwan received the letter, he must have thought it was a boring reader pretending to be a woman. And even his colleagues were joking with him, so he did not reply. When Chang Gaiwan wrote to say that the manuscript had been adopted, Chude smiled and said, when will I invite him to have tea? Julie thought it was unnecessary, but Chude seemed a little curious about Chang Gaiwan. So she couldn't object, so she had to write a note. And he immediately called to arrange a time for tea. Chang Gaiwan probably still looks like he did back then, tall and thin, wearing a robe, and a thin face, but he is bald and wearing a thin black shell wig. Of course he realized that the treat was to please him, but he did not appreciate her words, so no one had much to say. Julie explained that her mother was not in Shanghai, and pointed to a large photo hanging on the wall with a low frequency, and said with a smile, this is my mother. In the oval gold-rim frame, Rukyu's hair has been permed, but it still has the bangs in the early Republic of China, which are fluffy and cover her eyebrows. Chang Gaiwan looked at it and was obviously deeply impressed. That was his time. Oh, this is the old lady, he said. Julie felt that inviting him here was not only redundant, but also that the place was too cramped. It was clearly a bedroom, and it was not big at all. A small round table was crowded with tea sets, and the three of them sat almost knee-deep in a circle, which was not very decent. Chude didn't mind. She was flexible and open-minded. Debt-free. I once mentioned the money I owed my second aunt at that time. Julie smiled and said, I know, my second aunt told me. Chude was obviously surprised and very unhappy. That was a secret between the two of them. It was also for my uncle's sake to raise money, make stocks. I couldn't turn over the money at the moment. I was planning to move it temporarily. She lowered her voice. It was lost, and I later paid her back. At that time, there were still 3 alleys that had not been sold, and they had all been mortgaged more than once. Once they were sold, I would return the money to my second aunt. Oh, when the second aunt came to Hong Kong, I also guessed that I paid her back the money. Judy was silent for a while and then said, what did you think when you heard it? Julie smiled and said, I don't think anything. She didn't believe it. How come you don't feel anything? I think third aunt must have a reason. Judy paused, obviously not understanding. Didn't Ruikyu tell her it was for Brother Zhu? Julian smiled again and said, it's also because I used to enjoy the cool air on the balcony at night and listen to Sangu and Brother Zhu talking. I liked listening to it very much. I felt that the atmosphere between the 3 of them was very good. Oh, Chude didn't seem to remember much, but she was very happy. After a moment of silence, he added, only one time. The second brother ignored me when we met. not even after hearing about Brother Zhu. I was very hurt. I was very helpful to him when he first came to Shanghai. She followed Julie and called her second brother, the only cousin she admired. After graduating from college, she came out from Tianjin with her young mistress and found a small job in Shanghai. Her family had money, but she didn't rely on her family. The young lady was married to her family and is a little deaf. Judy once said, "These young people now are on the contrary. They only need the money from their families, but they don't need the wives they marry." Julie and her brother went to their place once. Julin often went there, and the letter the family's disgrace was written to his second brother. The couple lived on the same floor. The 2 rooms were quite large and deserted with 2 old pieces of furniture. Both of them are typical northerners. The second brother is tall, has a long red-white face, and tortoiseshell-rimmed glasses. He could be the hero of Zhang Henshui's novel. The second sister-in-law also has a long face, short but not petite. She was attentive and a little flustered. Julie had already paid attention. She wanted to speak louder, but it was not too loud. She still needed him to convey the message. He was obviously embarrassed, cold and unhappy. Julie felt that they were miserable and did not have the joy that small families have. She had read Zhang Zibai's novel The Lu Man serialized in the magazine Truth, Goodness, and Beauty. In it, Yunfeng fell in love with her cousin, but she didn't know that the cousin-nephew, she only saw the paragraphs and didn't make it clear, had a physical relationship. The man was caught by the clan leader and taken to the ancestral hall to make a plank. The woman hired a sedan chair and rushed to rescue her. The protagonist, Mr. Liu, was afraid that she would suffer a loss. Although that was in the early Republic of China, the influence of the patriarchal society is still there today. In addition, Judy is not of the same age as Yunfeng. Julie never asked Brother Zhu's age because her third aunt must be sensitive to this. But he entered college very late and graduated when he was about 26 or 17 years old, maybe even more. He is the kind of person whose age is hard to tell. The second brother even thought of himself. He was also a junior, and Judy was also very enthusiastic about helping him. Even helping seems to have ulterior motives. He also has a defective wife. Judy fell silent, and Julie couldn't think of anything to say to relieve her, so she interrupted. "Does Aunt Bao know that Uncle Bao is dead?" They didn't tell her. After a moment of silence, Judy added, "Actually, you can't blame him for the matter between cousin and uncle cousin. It was her brother who forced him to do it. His wife had just died, and her brother talked to him twice in the study, days and nights. They were old relatives. Of course my cousin wasn't so fat at that time, and everyone said she looked happy. He was the third aunt at that time. When he married to fill a house, the other aunts were dismissed, so he took her. I took my third aunt to take office. I had served in Beijing. My cousin said that when she was a bride, my third aunt kowtowed and I wanted to return the favor. But the kissers on both sides held me back and prevented me from bending down." With her whispering and joking tone, "My mother-in-law has already given instructions to those who follow me." The third aunt came to the new house to talk to the eldest grandma. The house in the north has 2 windows. The upper one can only be opened halfway and is supported by a redwood stick. When it was hot, the eldest grandma asked to open the window. There happened to be no one around, so she called the third aunt brought the window stick. The third aunt didn't say anything at the time. As soon as she left the bridal chamber, she cried all the way back, saying that the eldest aunt treated her as a servant. The uncle was so angry that he never entered the new house. The roommates all said that their young lady had a good temper. "It was like this when I came here. How will I live in the future?" She made her make a fuss, so she made a big fuss. For some reason, it was said that the bride was so strong that she knocked down the wall. Maybe the Yemen house was old. It was about to collapse. Julie had seen a photo of her third aunt in her cousin's photo album. She was dressed in late Qing Dynasty style and had an oval face with sharp ends. She was extremely charming and slender. The uncle has been ignoring her. Later, the third aunt became a wise man and persuaded the uncle to be nice to her. They also took her out to see theaters and restaurants. This was the golden age of her life. Her brother came to Beijing and called go. The phone is installed in the third aunt's yard. Ask the eldest grandma to answer the phone and ask, Grandma in the east room or grandma in the west room? Her brother was so angry that he ran away immediately and slapped him in the mouth. The uncle sent her back to Shanghai. He never stayed at home when he came back to Shanghai. Only once. He was sick, and the old lady was worried about living in a small mansion, so she moved back to recuperate and asked the eldest grandma to take care of him. He came back to live for a few months, and cousin thought that it would be great if she could have a child. Later she told people, Miss Sue lives in the next room, and her father is embarrassed. If it was blamed on Sister Sue would be so angry. Sister Sue was born to the former wife. Brother Sue was born to the third aunt's girl, Chuda said. After she was born, the third aunt sold her to another place. I don't know where she was sold. She was left to take care of the child, so Brother Sue hated her. And cousin is still very good to her. She still comes here often. When she comes, she stays with Aunt Cousin. Her hair is bald and she wears a thin wig. Once she is bald, the uncle ignores her. Brother Sue he also cried to his father, and he called her mother, thinking he was born by her. The uncle said to him, "Don't be stupid. She didn't raise you." Only then did he know. She comes to Shanghai every once in a while, and never sees me. My cousin is in charge anyway. She calls her Mrs. Mem a few times, and becomes very friendly with her again. She also says, "I'm in bad luck right now. I don't want to think about how unpleasant it was for her and her uncle to talk to her outside. The fat man wants it very much. When I came here, I lived in their pavilion. Brother Zhu hated it so much. Aunt Chow was so chilled by this kind of place. She was scared to death when we filed a lawsuit with the uncle. She didn't know how embarrassed she was. She was afraid of offending others." Said, "What a pity. We are a good relative," Julie said in surprise. "She said that?" Chu Di threw her head. "Isn't that so? People say this. It's very important to have such a good relative come around. When something happens to my cousin, my aunt goes to the relatives' houses to kowtow. She blames Brother Zhu for not following him. Help! Who really helped? That's why Chow Auntie is like this." When Julie came back, she felt that Shanghai was different from Hong Kong after all, and there were almost no Japanese soldiers. They all say, Shanghai is still like that. The homespun cloth she brought back was red and green, and she dared to wear it out. She made cheongsams and simplified Western-style shirts and skirts. It was like wearing a famous painting on her body. She was so happy and extraordinary, not caring about other people's reactions. "There are no movies to watch now," Chuda said with a sad smile. "I just like those comedies that are playful and fun. Especially the professional woman played by Rosalind Ruosu. She is closer to her," Julie thought. Bibi said, "These people really talk like this." She also believed it. It is their cultural tradition, so they can almost say a few words. High-level flirting is a little different from what Shanghai people call eating tofu. Eating tofu only eats the tofu of crazy and silly 13 o'clock women, with an element of contempt. Chuda smiled again. It's fun to talk to Zhao Li in the office. Zhao Li shared a room with her. He was of mixed race, thin and pale, with black hair. Julie had seen him before, and he seemed familiar. If Julin grows up naturally and everything goes as he wishes, it will probably be like this, driving by himself, getting married very young, having a career, but no future. The mongrel's status in the foreign business is equal to that of Chudi, and neither of them is a scientific and technological talent. She has already reached the top, and the salary is high for a single woman. Brother Zhu was not good with me at that time. I often came back from the office very late and flirted with Zhao Li. I was also scared, she said with a smile, but her voice suddenly dropped and became heavy at the end of the sentence, obviously referring to rape. Julie also knew a little bit about the emptiness of the office after work, and the desolation of the business area building at night. But how could she think that this very young and beautiful colleague would rape her? It was a bit shocking and sad. Chudi was silent for a moment, and then said, "Brother Zhu is just on good terms with Aunt Wei, and I'm really angry." Julie whispered in shock. "How about Aunt Wei?" Aunt Wei in the second room of the Zhu family is a beauty, and Brother Wei and her are also a couple and have several children together. She has a pointed face, a pretty face, A small flower tip on her forehead, and the orange-red fat on her cheeks highlights her dark and bright almond-shaped eyes. It's just that he's a little too short, and he's always had a matchbox figure. I usually imitate the South American singer Carmen Macrina and wear a large pink lotus silk flower on the top of her head to make her look more radiant. When Julie was a child, she liked her sister Yen. She was actually not as good as her, but she didn't like her. Maybe it was because her Changshu Mandarin was particularly harsh. Brother Zhu can't tell what he is. It's true that people can't be judged by appearance. Julie was very disgusted and felt that he was too sorry for her third aunt. It was Chudi who gave him self-confidence, so he had the courage to steal favors and jade, and get everything he wanted. The children of the Zhu family all married late in accordance with the popular custom. Only Brother Wei got married. It was also because he was dishonest and played dancers when he was in his 10s and 20s. So he had to marry a young mistress as soon as possible. And he had to marry a mistress, beautiful, so that he can feel at ease. I went to the mainland to look for a beauty from the south of the Yangtze River, who was also a relative of theirs. Her family was conservative and had no money, so she should be able to get by. The Zhu family has reached the silk generation, and their money has been used by the previous generation, especially since they have more people in the second house. They are even more strapped, but he is not short of going out for fun after marriage. Sister-in-law Wei wants to take revenge. In fact, Brother Zhu is the most logical candidate. He has many opportunities to get close to him. He is not amazing in appearance and will not attract attention. Moreover, we have been together for many years. We know that he is cautious and tight-lipped. He is absolutely reliable. In her position, safety comes first. For his part, he must have already envied her. He doesn't have the same temperament as the eldest young master Wage, and she may have the feeling of being a national scholar. Julie recalled at this time that when Brother Zhu mentioned sister-in-law, the two words were also very soft, just like the father in his mouth. Of course he said it to Chu Di, but strangely, there was no guilt in his voice. Was it because nothing really happened at that time? Or Chu Di didn't know about it at that time? Or is he still calm after knowing it? He must have used this to get rid of Chu Di. Sister-in-law Wei obviously also knew about Chu Di. When she called her cousin, her voice was particularly unpleasant and very hostile. Before Brother Zhu left, I told him about it, and we are still very good friends. If we don't tell him about it, I will always feel bad. Although Julie was not righteous, she also understood that it was because of their incident that it turned ugly later on. She wanted it to have a beginning and an end and remain a beautiful thing. Otherwise she would not be able to bear the memories. Chuda smiled again and said, "He is married now, and he is also an old relative of their family, a third lady." She is also a third lady, as if she feels that the coincidence of this number is fateful. She is petite and exquisite. She is a spoiled young lady, and she is very spoiled. She wants him to take care of her at every turn. Now he is working in Tianjin and living with his mother-in-law, who is also very spoiled by him. After a moment of silence, Chuda whispered again, "He likes you," seemingly casually. Julie was extremely surprised. What do you like about her? Unless you envy her height. Or is it out of sympathy, because they both grew up in the shadow of their parents? No one has ever liked her. Of course she wants to know when he said it and how he said it. But the third aunt must have paid a considerable price for saying this. She can no longer ask. She can only laugh. She doesn't like him. Not just because of sister-in-law Wei. She was too maternal to appreciate his pity as a miserable, homeless child. Maybe he was too similar to her in some ways, and she didn't like people who looked like her, especially men. When she was in middle school, she created a souvenir book. Everyone had one and looked for someone to write it. If she didn't want to write it, she would write studying is like sailing against the current. If you don't advance, you will retreat. She asked Brother Zhu to draw a picture in her book. He learned Chinese painting from his fifth father, but she said, "You can paint anything, except Chinese painting." When she was a child, her family had a teacher who knew how to paint Chinese painting, and taught her to only use ochre and cyan. She thought in her heart, I thought, "Isn't that half blind?" After 2 days of studying, I stopped learning. She is always hungry for color. She only remembered saying this to him, and he never talked to her. She smiled and took the memorial album. After a while, she handed in the paper and drew a dancing blonde beauty in the new art style of the end of the century. The middle man has an oval face with pointed ends, and his hair is parted in the middle and stuck close to his head. He looks more like his enemy, the third aunt. After her third aunt had a career and she began to earn royalties, two German tenants moved out to create an extra room. I stopped eating scallion pancakes, and Laukin's mother also retired. Judy actually knew how to cook and had attended a cooking school abroad. But she was afraid of being cheated, so she became the housekeeper. But now she is willing to cook to simple dishes. Julie only knows how to cook and does the grocery shopping. That night I went to buy crab shell yellow under the moonlight. She was wearing a tight purple flower cloth short cheongsam, with a straight figure and half-curly long hair. The Shandong people at the sesame cake stall couldn't help but look at her twice, not sure what the meaning was. The bright moon was shining over her head on the way home, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. I am 22 years old and write love stories, but I have never been in love, so it is not good for others to know. This match came one afternoon. The newly recovered guest room is L-shaped and very long. Red brick fireplace. The thin sunshine in November shines through the glass door, not deep enough, and it is as hazy as flying catkins. Someone wrote a criticism in a magazine and said good things about me. He was an official of the Wang government. Yesterday, there was another letter from the editor saying that he was in jail. She told Bibi with a smile, as a joke in this era. At first, the female editor when she sent her the proof of the book review, the writing style was very similar to that of Lu Shun. The extremely thin proof paper was snow white, and the proofreading was in large Chinese characters. It looked like a thread-bound book, and she was a little reluctant to send it back. After sending it, Wenji sent another letter saying, Xiao Jun has lost his freedom. He is a tough guy and he doesn't need money. Julie was a little worried that the book review could not be published. Wenji didn't mention it, so maybe it was okay. On the one hand, she was daydreaming about rescuing Xiao Jiang. She despises young people's dreams. As a result, Araki, a Japanese military consultant, rushed into the detention center with a pistol and was released. When I came to Shanghai after that, I asked Wenji for her address and came to see her. She was wearing an old black coat, had handsome features, and spoke Mandarin that sounded a bit like Hunan dialect, like a professional. Chuda smiled when they met for the first time. Have you come with me, madam? Julie smiled immediately. Chinese people all have wives after a certain age, so why does the third aunt need to remind her? It's also a bit too obvious. Jiang agreed and smiled. After leaving, Chuda said, his eyes are very bright. You look very young when you are with your third aunt, but very mature when you are not with her, Jiang said. He comes every day. Their house door is kept open all day long, just like some Chinese houses. Especially because there is a tenant who has all the doors in the corridor closed. He is just like staying in a hotel. Opening the door will make him feel like he has broken into someone else's house. But sitting in the living room with the door closed for a long time, Julie really feels that embarrassed. Chudi only frowned and said softly with a half smile, come here every day. She always saw half of his profile, sitting on the sofa diagonally across from Liang. His thin cheeks, slightly haggard shadows in his eye sockets, and his arched lips with ridges on the edges. When he fell silent, he used his hand to twist a piece of woolen thread on the armrest of this sofa chair, with a slight smile and his eyes looking down, as if holding a full glass of water, being careful not to spill it. You have the light of God on your face, he said softly, suddenly a little puzzled. My skin is oily, she explains with a laugh. Is your face shiny? He also smiled. He asked her to go to Xiangjing's house and said that Xiangjing wanted to meet her. Xiangjing was a scholar before the war, and of course he had a high status in the occupied areas. Jiang came to pick her up after dinner on his son's bicycle and called a tricycle for her. On a cold winter night, the road is quite far. Xiangjing lives in a garden house. There are many people in the large living room with square ebony walls. It is a cocktail party without wine. Julie wears light yellow-rimmed glasses, a face as translucent as fresh Likey's, and only wears pink lipstick. Her half-curly hair is as thin as spider silk, but not black, and is piled feebly on her shoulders. She wears a bell-sleeve peacock blue ning. The silk cotton robe looked a bit strange. She was still a little stiff when meeting people, and few people talked to her. "I am still your cousin," Xiangjing told her. They had a lot of relatives. When they were abroad, their second aunt and third aunt always said, "Don't look over there. That person over there looks a bit like our relative." Xiangjing is an overseas student who has returned to the trend. After returning home, he wears a robe and smokes cigarettes, but he is still a handsome man with a Greek-style profile. His wife was originally married to her at home, but she did not show up that day. He has stopped writing for a long time, and now he has more reason to keep a low profile. Julie wanted to leave, but found Xiang. He was sitting on the sofa talking to two people. It was the first time she saw the contemptuous look in his eyes, and she was shocked. She admires him. Why can't she let him know? It is equivalent to sending a bouquet of flowers when passing by. It is as desperate as the popular love in medieval Europe. It is often between a knight and his lord's wife, and is so formalized that even the lord does not interfere. She has always felt that only purposeless love is real. Of course, she didn't say anything medieval to him, but he later wrote about seeking the Holy Grail. After he left, she picked up the cigarette butts from the ashtray and put them in an old envelope. She had the photos and showed them to him. Since she was not wearing glasses, she thought they were her true colors. There was one photo that when she wanted to take for publication, she went to a German photographer Saipal across the street to take the photo. It was very expensive, so she only printed one photo. Only a face is exposed in the shadow, with no hair visible, like a painting by Rowan Brandt. The light was too dark and the print in the magazine was blurry, so the original one was more unique. So he liked it and gave it to him. "This is one side of you," he said of another. "This is the whole person. Although the print in the magazine was unclear, I saw you in the detention center and I could tell you were very tall." Before he left, she opened the desk drawer and showed him the envelope filled with hottie. He smiled. Every time he asked, "Are you disturbing your writing?" she always shook her head and smiled. He found that she ate, slept and worked in this room and said with a smile, "You are still living a student life." She only smiled. Later she said, "I don't think it's normal to be poor. My family is so poor that even eating a piece of fruit becomes a moral issue. You are like me when I was young. I was working at the post office at that time, and someone sent me a post. I read it very well, so I kept it." He once fell in love with a fourth lady from his hometown. She wanted to study in Japan. They could have gone together. It cost 400 yuan, but there was none. He said with a smile, "I saw a photo of her in the past 2 years, and she hasn't changed much. She's wearing a shirt and long hakama," he said. He didn't say whether she was married, and Julie couldn't bear to ask. She thought she must have been married a long time ago. In addition to telling some short stories from his life, he also had many theories. She feels that theories, in addition to having solid evidence, often have wishful thoughts and wishful thinking to summarize the facts into a frame. His style and attitude are a bit like those of the left, but he doesn't like the Communist Party, which is always cruel and miserable, and cannot stand their discipline. In her opinion, the concept of communism actually has nothing to do with it. The trend of modern thinking is that everyone should have food to eat. In some matters, such as education, people should take as much as they can stomach. But practice is one thing. As for discipline, if you give all your freedom to others, you will definitely not return for a long time. The theory of the peace movement is not too practical, so it has to be unreasonable. He idealized rural China, which she thought was just nostalgia, and she didn't pay attention to him. But every night after he left, she was so tired that she trembled and felt exhausted. She sat in the third aunt's room and leaned over the small electric stove, folding her arms and looking at the red fire. Chuda didn't speak much, as if a disaster was about to happen, and she spoke quietly, as if there was a sick person at home. Julie never left anyone to eat because her third aunt was required to cook. But it became an embarrassment to sit down until 7 or 8 o'clock. without leaving time for dinner. Coupled with Chu Dai's embarrassment, she couldn't stand the 2 attacks. She wanted to go on a secret trip to break this vicious cycle. But one of her old classmates went to Changzhou to work as a female teacher. She seemed to have been slapped in the mouth by a Japanese soldier at the train station. She never said anything. Now is not the time to travel. And there is no spare money. One night before he left, she stood up to see him out. He put out his cigarette butts, put his hands on her arms, and said with a smile, "Can you please take off your glasses?" She smiled and took off her glasses. As soon as he kissed her, a powerful spasm ran down his arm, and he could feel the thickness of his arm and his sleeve. Julie thought, "This person really loves me." But a square tongue tip immediately stuck into his lips. A dry cork, because her mouth was dry because she talked too much. He immediately felt her disgust, so he smiled and let go. The next day he came out for dinner and was treated to a treat. She could smell the alcohol as she made tea and set it in front of him. After talking for a while, he sat next to her. "Can we be together forever?" Under the dim light, she turned her head on the back of the sofa and looked at him with a smile. "You're drunk." "When I'm drunk, I can only feel that good things are better, and hateful things are even more disgusting." He took her hand and turned it over to look at the lines on the palm. Then looked at the other hand and said with a smile, "It's so boring. It looks like palmistry." "Now, then," he said, "let's be together forever, okay? Where's your wife?" Did he pause? "I can get a divorce." "How much will it cost?" "I don't want to get married now. I will look for you in a few years." She couldn't say that when he fled to a remote town after the war, she would go all out to find him and meet him again in the shadow of a dim oil lamp. He smiled and said nothing, talking about how he asked a guard to buy a magazine for him in the detention center and read what she had written. He smiled and said, "I promoted it to the guard, so the guard was very nice to me." He added, "You have a very rosy name. It's not like a pen name. I wonder if it's a man's pseudonym. If it's a man, you have to go to him, and all possible relationships will happen." When he was leaving, he stopped her by the door, propped one arm on the door, and looked at her with a smile for a long time. He has a relatively broad front, a bit of a feminine look, and is a shrewd woman in the market. She didn't look at him. Her smile was thousands of miles away, perhaps under the city lights over there. All he finally said was, "You have very high eyebrows." After he left, she told Chude with a smile. Xiao Jiang said, "Can we be together forever?" He said he could get a divorce. After spending so many hours alone, she really needed an explanation. She didn't like to tell people unless it was necessary, so Bibi didn't say anything. I used to talk to Bibi about almost everything, and even wrote a long letter to Chude in Hong Kong. But since she started writing, she felt that no matter what she said, someone would understand it. Even if she didn't understand it, she had a sense of confidence that someone would always understand it. There was a time when I was in a difficult situation, and I felt that my words were not expressive, so I was unwilling to tell anyone anything. Every time I made an exception, I never got satisfaction and comfort, and I always regretted it later. Chuda listened and laughed and said, "I have always wanted to know what people say when they propose marriage." One time, Brother Zeus said, "Why are you not married?" I was lying on the bed at that time. I didn't hear clearly and thought he said, "Why don't you marry me? I'm getting married." I said, "You didn't tell me." The dialogue was all in English, with a brisk tone, as if it were a witticism from a Hollywood comedy. But the next line was obviously a self-conscious anticlimax. He said, "No, I mean, why are you not married?" Julie was extremely embarrassed for them both, but Third Aunt didn't seem to mind much, and Brother Zoo was forced to pass by him. After feeling relieved, Chuda said again, "Of course you know that you and he are in different situations when it comes to marriage." "I know." Young didn't come the next day. A week or two later, Chuda said hurriedly, "Xiao Jiang hasn't been here for several days." Julie smiled and said, "Hey." 2 rows of sycamore trees on the road have just taken out their leaves, each holding a bowl of green dots high. It's cold in spring, and it's a bit wet. She was walking on the road in a very light mood. One thing ended successfully, she hoped. but also felt a little disappointed.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.